Apart from having two re-releases or repaints, there are some other very strange factors as to why this Gold Label Amazon exclusive McFarlane 3-pack is a bit cheap, and the results are a little surprising, maybe even a little controversial. First of all, our greatest culprit, McFarlane. What are you guys doing? What are you doing? What is this? What is this? And that's a legitimate question, not even rhetorical. What is it, apart from the labeling we have at the bottom that reads Clayface, Batman, and Batwoman? What is it? Because I clearly cannot tell exactly what figure I am getting. Yes, I took to social media to exactly call out this specific form of packaging, which is a very generic DC Multiverse box that's completely black with the DC Multiverse logo here on the front, the gold label here in the corner, and again, like I mentioned before, the names of the figures that are included, but this is very against type, against character for McFarlane, and I've seen some people come to the defense saying that the majority of the time when this happens, it's for reissues, re-releases, repackagings of some sorts, repaints rather, and I guess with that rationale, it kind of makes sense, but it's a slippery slope, guys. We can't exactly give too much slack here because otherwise they're going to be like, all right, well, if they're okay with that, then I guess we can start packaging formal releases, exclusive releases that we've never really seen before for particular figures, but with this brand of packaging. McFarlane, don't pull a Marvel Legends, don't go down that road, because we already had this sort of kerfuffle with Marvel Legends. We made our voice be heard, and thankfully it looks like they're slowly turning things around back to the standard on-card bubble packaging. Sure, it's a pain to kind of cut through it, but at least you know what exactly you're getting. Here, like I said, the little bit of slack you can cut them is that these are re-releases for the most part. We'll get to that later on, but I really do not want to see this, even if it means that, yes, on the back you do get some artwork from DC Rebirth of Batman, Clayface, and Batwoman fighting each other inside of this, like, factory warehouse kind of setting, and overall the art is not too bad. I just think that it looks a little too coloring book for my taste, but still, I would have appreciated maybe we can don some of this on the front, and if not that, then just do the translucent window like you've done before. Once you start getting through the figures, all the accessories, or lack thereof, you get for the value of $70, you start to realize exactly why you're getting this set so cheap, especially for some very unbeknownst reasons that still puzzle me. The first one of the bunch is gonna be the DC Rebirth Batman, and if you couldn't already tell, yes, he is pretty much just a straight up repaint of the original single release, which is not necessarily, or I should say inherently, a bad thing, because I was praising this figure before in my original review, which you can actually check out on the channel. And as such, I won't be exactly breaking down every single specific detail about the new one because he really is just straight up the exact same figure. The only significant changes that are very apparent are obviously going to be that he is gray instead of like a dark blackish gray, which I personally kind of favor, but he is still able to pull off the light gray fairly well. That's actually just how good of a sculpt this exactly is. The purple is a little lighter on the inside of his cape. It's not as muted as it was on the original. The yellow is a bit more saturated than the original hue on the belt and the outline of the bat symbol on his chest, and you'll notice that, speaking of that belt, he is missing those little black divots on the ridges of the belt on the sides, which I'm kind of indifferent on. I don't really lean towards one side or the other with that, so them being there or not being there, it doesn't really matter much to me, like Bohemian Rhapsody. But the rest of the figure just pretty much pans out exactly as it was before in terms of sculpting, minus maybe the missing stubble on the mouth, as well as a darker shade of skin tone as opposed to the original. He looked a little bit pale and much more grisly with the original singular release, whereas here it looks like I said, he got a little bit of extra sun and he just seems a little bit happier with, again, his lighter color palette. So you could say that this is the much friendlier DC Rebirth Batman, and this is the one that is still brooding all the time. Now, whether or not one is better than the other, it really definitely falls on preference. Me personally, I still favor the original, but this, again, this is a testament to the original sculpt. It still looks pretty neat here, even though when it comes to Batman's palette, I always prefer the darker stuff versus the light gray, but this actually still looks pretty neat. That's just how powerful of an original sculpt this guy is. Everything else, however, still falls in line the same as far as sculpt, articulation, posability, movement. Everything is still one-to-one. That also includes the accessories. The grapple is completely identical, no differences that I was able to note. The Batarang, on the other hand, sculpting is the exact same thing, but you'll notice that the paint apps are a little different. Instead of being just a straight up black like the original, this time he's got like this little bronze copper look of gradient approach to it to make it look a little weathered. In my opinion, it's just an excuse to say, hey, this is the Gold Label repaint. This is the Gold Label variant of the Batarang. Aside from that, though, this looks pretty much the same, and like I said before, I feel kind of indifferent to it. So you're not really losing or gaining anything here with the DC Rebirth Batman. Clayface, on the other hand, is going to be a bit of a strange case because he's a similar situation, except not too similar to me, because technically this is also a repackaging and almost not even that much of a repaint, except maybe, judging from photos, it looks like the shade of his mud, so to speak, is a little lighter, because, you know, they have to make it clear that this is a Gold Label edition, so he's going to be a different variant. Aside from that, I really couldn't pinpoint any other different details as far as sculpting, as far as paint, as far as the face, as far as anything that was etched onto the figure, except, like I said, that hue made it a little brighter. Now, you may have noticed I used the term photos. Now, I looked at photos for reference because that's where things get a little different for me personally. I never had a chance to get the singular release of the Megafig Clayface because at that time, prior to the release of Justice Buster and a couple of other Mega figures that kind of tickled my fancy a little bit, there weren't any other incentives to go back into the Megafig line after my experience with Bane. I'm in the minority that didn't really like that Bane so much, apart from looking pretty cool. I was kind of hoping that the articulation would favor, and so I was kind of out of the weeds with Mega figures. So when they released Clayface, I was like, oh, it looks kind of cool, but I sincerely don't know if this is a pickup. This is probably one of the perks of getting this 3-pack is that aside from DC Rebirth Batman, this is where I felt like it was worth it for me because now I'm getting my own Clayface that, albeit is just, like I said, a little brighter in terms of the hue, in terms of the mud texture. But aside from that, he is still a centerpiece. As far as just looking at him dead on, this is a very meticulously crafted and sculpted mega figure of Clayface. There's no denying that. There's an awful lot of work that went into actually sketching out the little pieces of mud, the stuff that's like kind of dripping in the sludge around his arms, around his legs, and the way that his feet are kind of designed to look like they're kind of rising from the ground right here is immaculate. The way that some of the mud is actually kind of webbing alongside the innards of his fingers looks really cool. And then everything comes to a boil when you get to the shoulder, the arm, and head area, because not only do you have these really cool, albeit a little disturbing sculptures of faces and skulls inside of his shoulders, because you could almost kind of toss this up, and I'm pretty certain that there's some merit to this, that this is kind of like the other identities that Clayface has taken whenever he's impersonated somebody, but they're still kind of resting somewhere in the body. I love that. I love the mythos. I love the story that it's telling, and I love the way that they were able to sculpt that out into his shoulders, into the back. And then you see a little bit of like the mud kind of hardening towards the top right here, where you see these little like spikes, albeit a little Sandman-y. But if you look a little closer, like I said, you'll get more of those little skulls and faces, ghostly faces. You even have a hand, at least it looks like a hand to me, protruding out of one of his elbows. This is just all really well done that it's haunting. It's actually very perfect for the spooky season, even though spooky season's damn near kind of coming to a close here. But still, if there was a character that kind of embodies the Halloween spirit within the Batman universe, I mean, take your pick. There's plenty of them, but I feel like one of the top contenders will be Clayface. And that is definitely made the case spoken for when you get to that head sculpt. Not only is it really well sculpted, painted, it's just, like I said, meticulously well done. But then you even have the articulated jaw that you can then press down and reveal the very nasty jaw and gum line that's really well painted and sculpted on the inside right there. And you can actually kind of make it look like he's talking. So overall, the actual presentation done with Clayface here, I can definitely see why a lot of people were pretty much standing up for him when the Mega figure was released back then as a standalone release. But unfortunately, once I'm able to kind of wear that down and you know, push it down and kind of get through it, I then get reminded why I kind of jumped out of the mega figure business, because then we get to some really stagnated and really problematic articulation with this guy. I'll get through it as quickly as possible because after all, this is technically a re-release of the standalone version, because there's really not much different going on right here in terms of sculpt. It's just that the shade might be just a bit brighter for the Gold Label so that it fits a bit more at home with the Rebirth Batman and Batwoman. But aside from that, you're pretty much getting the exact same figure. And like I said, that might be working against it in my sake, because the head, apart from the articulated jaw here that's able to open and close, the head can kind of rotate in place to the left and to the right, as you can see right there, clockwise and counterclockwise, but not much else going for it, especially because of this very robust plastic piece at the top right here that's kind of mounted on top to the shoulders, and that's kind of limiting a little bit of the head to be able to rotate all the way around. So this is pretty much all you're really getting, and it can kind of nudge and tilt just a little bit in place, but honestly, that's all you're really getting right there. Very Rancor styles. Then the top arms can fully rotate vertically, a full 360, but once you get to that very rigid plastic piece here at the top of the shoulders that looks like it can kind of separate, because there's an awful lot of separation and paneling happening right here on the inside portion of his shoulder, and even towards the back right here, right above these sculpted faces, you can kind of see a little bit of the plastic starting to separate here at the top. So I was wondering if maybe that could be moved or if it's supposed to flex, but from what I can tell, nothing is really happening. Nevertheless, you are technically still able to rotate the arms like I mentioned before and extend them towards the sides. The actual joint and rod on the inside is pretty generous for that, but just mind just a little bit on the loose side. And like I said, it makes an awful lot of noise. Not as badly as that voice crack I just had, and not as bad as the elbows. This is where, like I said, things get almost downright painful, quite literally, because since it is a mega figure, and since they're still trying to aim for those 22 points of articulation, they baked in the swivel along with the elbow joint into the elbows right here. So you only get really one full bend instead of the two that you usually get for 6-inch or 7-inch figures, but you do have the top swivel right above that. It's just that, like I said, the plastic is just made so robust and so stiff that it's difficult to really do anything with either of these joints. And I've already passed it with the hairdryer once, so this thing is just really crazy. It can definitely swivel. You can definitely see the swivel happening right there. But in terms of bending the elbow, the joint is in there. It's just that it doesn't really go too far in any kind of direction. It looks like maybe I could extend it, but like I said, it's just so hard. You know, no euphemism there, but it's just so difficult to do it in any kind of direction, especially with this little kind of like panel that you see right here that's kind of covering up the elbow joint to kind of blend it in and retain the illusion somewhat. Unfortunately, it doesn't really do anything too good as far as actually allowing the elbow to fully bend. But at the same time, why would you want Clayface to do that? Once you get to the wrist, though, it does become just a little bit more generous. You are able to technically move it left and right. And I guess, let's see if we could do the full Monty here. Yes, it could technically rotate the full 360. Like I said, very rigid, very tough, but you can have it happen slightly. Just be careful, because like I said, I'm already kind of damaging my finger somewhat here. And counting as its own joint, I guess you could say, is that little piece right there that pretty much allows the hand to bend inwards and outwards, though just mind the little bit of separation because of the way that it's sculpted, so that might ruin a little bit of your immersion, a little bit of the actual illusion to make it look like it's all one piece of clay. But it just needs to happen, right, in order to make this a reality. Because with mega figures, like I said, this is where so many compromises I just didn't appeal to. I understand what they needed to do to make this thing happen, but it's just like, I don't know. There's just something about messing around with the articulation that just kind of turned me off in a way that just ended up being frustrating. And it gets even worse with the torso here, because they decided to do, I guess what you could argue, mixed media, I guess you could say, because you're dealing with both hard plastic for the chest piece, but then you're dealing with a rubberized, muddy piece right here in the middle of the tummy, the middle of the abdomen, that also kind of blends a little bit into the crotch area, into the diaper. So this whole entire piece right here is just one big giant rubber diaper, and it technically allows the waist cut right here in the middle to slightly nudge left to right, but you can hear just how audible and ghastly this thing really is. It doesn't really move. It looks like the intention is for it to move, but it's just not going to. And the same thing could be said about tilting up and down. You can see that maybe a little bit of the diaper, a little lower, closer to the crotch area, kind of wants it to do that, but it's, I don't know, it just doesn't feel all too great in hand. You're better off just leaving it alone. But technically speaking, the mobility is there, and I feel like if it's going to be moving in any kind of direction and actually stay there, it's going to be towards the back, not so much towards the front. It's going to become way too heavy for it to be able to manage that. And I'm going to go ahead and just say it, you could pretty much forget about the legs, because even though they are able to move towards the front right about right there, this is actually one of the more favorable joints out of the entire goddamn figure is actually the legs. The top legs can fully bend all the way up like so, and then almost towards the back, at the exact same angle, even the rubber's kind of flexing it to allow that to happen. An extension towards the sides, again, not too bad. Clayface, no matter how huge he is able to do the splits, but at the same time, Mud being so flexible, it should allow it. I mean, that's actually pretty lax of him. It's only when we get to these knees that, oh my god, they're so rigid. You can technically part them and bend them slightly like so, but that's really all you're really getting. And you could pretty much forget about any kind of toe articulation. There's none found here. So you could see that several different compromises were made for Clayface that, in my opinion, I use that as a way to kind of justify of not getting the original release. And so far, the only thing that kind of made it worth it for me is the fact that it's being bundled with two other figures. Sure, one of them is one that I've already owned before, the DC Rebirth Batman. But the next one is technically one that I never owned, and I think technically no one else has owned in McFarlane toy fashion. But in terms of under a different umbrella, under a different brand label, and a different toy wave that's part of the DC multiverse, that may have been the case. This is the mystery surrounding Batwoman. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a mystery surrounding her. Apart from the fact that I had to lower my camera just a smidge to get her center frame, and that's because she is very apparently shorter than your typical 7-inch McFarlane figure. Pulling her out of the box, yeah, you could argue that she's a little to scale to Batman in terms of accuracy, but there was just something kind of funky about the proportions, about the way that she was scaled, the way that the legs and the arms felt versus other parts of the body that are very reminiscent of McFarlane, that are very typical for them. Because right off the bat, yeah, this is in fact Cassandra Cain, aka Batwoman, with the red and black, the long streaking red hair, and then the very, very saturated makeup that she has on the mouth plate, specifically the white foundation along with the red lipstick. So you could see that this is in fact that version of Cassandra Cain, and it's very faithful to the comic adaptation specifically for DC Rebirth, since you have an awful lot of traits here that, you know, do the job for the most part. You don't really see anything terribly remarkable, but nothing too floundering either, except for my particular unit having a couple of little of those glistening splotches that I don't really appreciate all that fully. You can see a little bit here on the thigh as well as the arm, but overall the sculpt is not too bad. You see the utility belt right there, pretty well sculpted and glued on to the hips, as well as the bat symbol, which obviously because of the physique, you're gonna have the bat symbol kind of just floating on top right here, so you never really have it head on, but it just kind of comes with the territory. The arms and the legs are just kind of standard, but when I saw this figure initially, whether it be for the promo photos or pulling it right out of the box initially, I knew that two things were going to be major problems. One of them is the lesser of the evils, which was going to be this cape. Not a huge fan of this style of cape. You know how I feel about McFarlane doing these kind of windy ones that don't take too many extreme liberties of being really creative and very stylistic. You just kind of have a little bit of a wind effect, but nothing going the full Monty. And therefore, when you have something kind of just like this, it's just kind of like, oh, I kind of wish it was a little bit more on the neutral side, or kind of spread evenly across both directions. So having a little off to the side like this, I can tell that one of the arms is going to be fully feasible as far as mobility, but the other one is going to be kind of in the way. But that's nothing. That pales in comparison to what I knew was going to be a heavy problem, the hair. You could see that the hair is just in the way of so many different little elements here on the top part of the figure, whether it be the head, the shoulders, and just overall, I gotta be honest, it just looks kind of ugly. I just don't really like the hair all that much. It looks very splotchy. It looks like this giant, rubberized glop that's just kind of on top. I understand the effect that they were trying to go for, but I don't even remember Batwoman having this much hair in any kind of comic iteration, so I wish that they would have dialed a bit on the hair. But that's assuming that McFarlane had total control or total oversight as far as the design for this figure. But again, we're hinting at a particular theory here that I feel will be better translated once we get to articulation. Which then brings us to our first bump in the road, and that's going to be the head. Practically gone. Yes, you are technically able to rotate it all the way around and kind of mold and sculpt the hair right out of the way, but every time I do it, I just get this rousing fear that the hair is just going to easily break off because of, just like I said, how globulous it is amongst the head, that it just feels nasty, especially these little like threads that are supposed to be strands of hair here at the front of the mask, but I just personally don't like it all that much. Nevertheless, you technically are still able to rotate the head all the way around. You could virtually forget about tilting though. Tilting up and down, it can kind of nudge it up and down. She gives like a half-baked sort of nod, but otherwise, apart from that, nothing really happening there, especially in the form of any kind of tilting. The hair is definitely going to make sure that that doesn't happen. So it is what it is. Once you get to the shoulders, my predictions as far as the involvement of the cape pretty much come to fruition. You have the left arm that is fully able to rotate vertically 360 degrees, but the right one really can't do that. It definitely can move up and down, and the joint is still functionable enough to allow that to happen, but the cape is going to be in the way, so mind that. Extension, however, is still pretty good on both sides, can evenly extend towards the sides at a full T-post right about right there. And then inside, it does look like there's a little bit of shrugging motion via the butterfly function, and it's definitely a lot more generous on the left because of the way that the cape is able to get out of the way. Bicep swivels are still found there halfway across, and you do have the two joints at the elbows that are fully able to bend up like so. And you do have the ball wrist. Actually, no, they're not ball wrist joints. They're actually the much more flush ones. So that's cool that McFarlane was able to sneak this in despite, like I said, certain discrepancies that I'm hinting at, considering the design and the overall look of Batwoman here as to why it is that this figure is just very perplexing. But you do have the wrist joints there that are fully able to bend halfway in and out, as well as fully rotate 360 degrees. The torso is a little funky because you do have the mid-torso cut that can technically rotate left and right, and it looks like it can go the full 360. I guess it can. Screw it, let's just do it right there. Not necessarily the fondest of this figure, even though, like I said, there's a theory that I have about it that is actually pretty interesting and pretty unique to talk about. But once you move past that, you do have a little bit of extension towards the back, not much in the way of crunching towards the front. The waist is able to allow that to go a little bit more towards the front and back a little bit. Not much in the way of waist articulation. You actually can nudge it left to right, but because of the way that the belt is kind of constricting the diaper, it really doesn't feel like it can go the full 360, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. However, the top legs can still allow the legs to fully extend towards the front like so. Extension towards the back is actually pretty decent, not too bad right about right there before the butt sculpt kind of gets in the way. And extension towards the sides, it's almost at a full 180. Unfortunately, this is not a thigh cut. It kind of looks like it is, and maybe it was at one point. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. I know I'm getting annoying with that, I'm sorry. But it doesn't look like there's any thigh swiveling found whatsoever. Every time I've nudged this figure and tried to see if maybe that was a stuck joint and I just need to heat it up, it looks like it's just an overall sculpted thigh, so nothing found there. But right below it, you do get the traditional two joints for the knee to fully bend up right above the boot. The ankle joints that are the joints that I do like, except they're kind of like a fusion of the ball joints from before, while at the same time also kind of looking like the cylindrical ankle pieces that are a bit more flush to the body that I like, that are a bit more on the contemporary side. So you are fully able to bend the ankle all the way down, bend it all the way up, and rotate it left and right at the top and bottom parts of the joints, as well as slight pivoting towards the insides and towards the outsides. So it's still pretty favorable as far as posability is concerned, and the toesies are still there to be able to fully bend up. So overall, you have an awful lot of joints that feel traditional, and then others that just feel pretty standard in the negative light, where you feel like maybe they could have innovated a little bit, especially when it comes to that head joint that is pretty non-existent due to the hair. But overall, like I said, it's that thigh swivel right here that just kind of gets my brain going. as far as what the deal is with this figure. However, that theory didn't stop McFarlane from throwing in a couple of accessories for her to be part of the Bat family. Of course, she's going to have a grapple that is a little bit more involved than that of Batman's. In fact, I would argue I like this one a little bit better than Batman's. It has kind of like this piston effect right here on the actual barrel of the gun, so to speak, and then you have this coil effect for the grapple kind of extending, and it's almost like it's mid-shooting, so that's pretty interesting and pretty cool, and it does fit into one of her only holding hand. However, they went with an even uglier Batarang, as you can see right there. I actually do like the sculpting of the Batarang itself, but unlike with the one with DC Rebirth Batman, they went with not only a gradient effect, but just overall this added paint splotch to make it look like I said, giving it that wear and tear look, but they didn't even bother to fade it out. It just looks like it's one wing is like this brownish kind of coppery look. It doesn't even have like a reflective sheen to it. It's just like a ugly brown kind of fade out, and then it just switches on over to black. It doesn't have a fade, it doesn't have a gradient, it just looks like it goes from brown to black, and in my opinion it just looks really ugly. It just bothers me that it's not even halfway through. If I ever have the time, maybe I'll just fully paint it out black the entirety of the thing, because this thing I just really hate it. But McFarlane will McFarlane when it comes to those accessories, at least the ones that they throw in, because aside from this and whatever DC Rebirth Batman came with, that's really about it. Yeah, so apart from the Batarang and grapple for the respective Bat people here, and practically no accessory for Clayface being a Mega Fig, and traditionally those don't really come with accessories that much because there's already so much plastic being allocated to the figure, nothing else is really included in this set. That's right, including the traditional trading cards and black bases. So you don't get a base or card for all three of these figures. They're nowhere to be found. So not only is this a little bit of a tactic on McFarlane to kind of lessen the value, but also you get a box that doesn't even have any front artwork or a window for you to take a look at the figures themselves. You just have the very coloring book style Rebirth art on the back. And now it's starting to come together as to why it is that you get this set for $70 versus $80, because a Mega figure is $40 and then each standard 7-inch figure is $20. So 20, 20, 40, you should technically be getting this for $80. To be able to cut at some of those costs and bring it down to $70, you're missing the cards, you're missing the bases, you have two figures that have already been released as standalone releases before, so what exactly are you getting that's new? I guess you would argue the Batwoman here, because as far as I can do through my digging and my investigation, I could not find a standalone release of this specific Batwoman in McFarlane toy form. Every time that I typed in on the internet, whether it be through second-hand markets like Mercari, eBay, or even the official McFarlane site, or any kind of professional listings for McFarlane Toys Batwoman, the only thing I would get back would be the Batwoman from Batwoman Beyond, which is the Batman Beyond variant with that specific style of suit, the black hair, the short black hair, the unmasked version or the variant, and the little bit of hair that comes out of her. But outside of that, I never saw the traditionally styled Cassandra Cain version that you see before you here. As far as the McFarlane toy branding, this is where my personal theory comes into play. I got some listings from both eBay and Mercari of this specific Batwoman from the Mattel toy line for the DC Universe wave. And suspiciously enough, it looks exactly like her. Of course, she's going to be shrunken down a little bit to 6-inch scale, and she's missing a few little details, some touch-ups, and then of course some points of articulation because she's a bit more on the robust side. She's a bit more traditional and a little older. So it kind of looks like one of those old school Mattel toys that kind of remind me of the Dark Knight Movie Masters wave that I covered on the channel before. But I never saw this specific version that was, for lack of a better term, McFarlaneized, even though they didn't do too much to her scale to keep her as accurate as possible to that of the height for Batman. You can see right here that they're pretty much accurate as far as their height is concerned. they did a couple of things here and there to add those joints, to add the little details as far as the touch-ups on the suit to give it that added layer of depth for the wrinkles, for the paint accuracy, etc. The typical stuff that you expect from McFarlane, specifically that cape. The way that this cape is molded is most definitely not the way that it was on that original Mattel version that I saw those listings for. Outside of that, though, the head as well as the belts. To me, the telltale signs are the red symbol on her chest, the belt, and the hair that look almost one-to-one to that of that Mattel toy listing that I would often see throughout the internet, which leads me to my theory that McFarlane spoke to someone at Mattel. They threw over those blueprints or plans or 3D renders, whatever, what have you, and they printed out a version of that Mattel version that they just kind of overhauled a little bit with their own, like I said, McFarlane details, threw in a couple of these accessories, the grapple and the batarang, the ugly batarang, and pretty much packed it in with these two other figures to call it a Gold Label Amazon exclusive that's part of the DC Rebirth wave. Now, whether this is necessarily a negative or a positive, it really falls down to preference because it's all about that value that you're getting. If you missed out on Clayface or the original DC Rebirth Batman and you get a spare Batwoman figure on the side, $70 is technically not bad. You just need to know the very bold disclaimer that you're not getting any basis, which is not really that much of a problem for Clayface because he's actually a pretty husky figure. He can stand on his own. But these two could probably have some problems with some posability, specifically this guy. It's a little top heavy with the cape. So you're missing out on the basis. You're missing out on the trading cards. So if you're a huge fan of those trading cards that McFarlane likes to throw in and you collect those, you're not going to be getting them with this set whatsoever. You're only going to get pretty much what you see right here. The 3 figures, the grapple and the batarang for both Bat people, and that's really about it. Seeing as these two are pretty much re-releases, the only newish figure is Batwoman, and she gets a 6 out of 10. She's okay. And for that matter, the entirety of the set also gets a 6 out of 10. It's an okay bargain value for people that missed out on two. I would honestly say, on average, 2 of the 3 figures that are presented here. But if you're only missing 1, I would say scour the internet as far as those aftermarkets like Mercari and such, where I found that DC Mattel version of this girl that leads me to that theory, and just find this specific variant if you're going for that total Batman complete collection, or if you're after this specific version of Clayface that you find to be a bit more faithful than the standalone release with the muted colors. But if you're still in the market for collecting all 3 and you do want to help out the channel in the process, there is going to be an affiliate link down in the description below for the Amazon listing of this exclusive. That way you guys can get yours as well. What I'm more interested, however, what do you guys think of the theory that apart from the re-releases, this specific Batwoman could be an existing Mattel print that McFarlane took over for, kind of like they do with DC Direct, gave it their own little characteristics, their own little touch-ups, added these accessories, and then bundled it into this specific pack. After all, it is still a theory. I can't necessarily prove anything. I might be I'm totally open to being wrong that is in fact the case, but there's enough, there's enough smoke here that there could be a fire somewhere nearby. Let me know what you guys think of that theory in the comment section below. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down. And as always, guys, stay humble. I'll see you guys on the next review.